I'm going to show you a series of adjectives. We're in our. Let me preface this because this is going to seem like a shock, especially from saying goodbye to some folks. We got to stop making announcements like that. I'm going to show you a series of adjectives, and I just want you to see if you can figure out who we are describing with these adjectives. All right. So here they are. Who? What kind of person are we describing? All right, Pharisees. We got Pharisees. Afraid to say it, I think. Some of you are afraid to say it. Some of you who have not grown up in the church are like, you're talking about Christians right there. That's a bunch of Christians. That's the kind of adjectives that get leveled at us. It's not super fun. And Pharisaical could be one of them too. And obviously in a room like this, we're primed to know the answer. I know some of you were like, I think that might be the people at the DMV. That's what it sounds like to me. But it is kind of troubling that you can throw some adjectives like that and people are going to be like, well, yeah, that's probably talking about Christians. And to be fair, there's a lot of things that we could talk about. I think a lot of you have maybe interacted with someone who was kind and generous and gracious, and you thought, man, I wonder if they're a Christian. But the sad truth is that these adjectives could be describing the way you've been interacted with, the way you've been treated by Christians. We are in this Great Question series, and this was the number one question as voted on by our church family. We had a series of 9 questions. We asked people to mark the ones that they were most interested in, and they could only vote once, and this, by a mile, won most votes. And I don't think it's a question. I don't think people who asked this said, I want to know about this. I don't think they were really asking a question. Now, the question was, why are Christians so hypocritical and hurtful? And that was the number one question. Why is that the case? And I don't think it's a question. I think it's a frustration. I think people are frustrated by the fact that it should not be this way, that we should be able to interact with other Christians, and we should be treated kindly and graciously, and we should be treated well. I think it's every vote might have been a painful memory. And if you don't have a story, you've heard a story, or you've watched a documentary. Unfortunately, there's a whole genre of church scandal documentaries. You probably have a friend that says something like, oh, I don't do organized religion. Well, they're probably talking about something happened to them, and they blamed churches for it and felt like churches had been hurtful or Christians had been hurtful. It's interesting to me as we've been going through this series, a lot of people's questions used to be primarily theological. They used to be questions like, why do bad things happen to good people? And I think we still have those questions, right? But it's interesting that I'm seeing a trend or sensing a trend that they're relational. The last 2 questions have been relational questions, and this question is really, why do bad Christians happen to good people? And I think that's a fair question to ask, because if we're following Jesus, if we're filled with the Spirit, if we're shaped by our love for God and wanting to please Him, why is there so much pain caused by Christians? Why do bad Christians happen to good people? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to explore the concept, kind of get our arms around what we're actually talking about, and then we're going to explore the biblical perspective. What does the Bible have to say about this? And I actually think it's pretty surprising to consider the fact that the Bible speaks a lot to this topic. So someone this week said to me, use this word, and I thought, oh, that's interesting that that's a word that has probably taken on a new meaning in the last 5, 10, 15 years. And they used this word right up here. Yeah, troll. Yeah, I'm glad we have a reading audience. Yes, troll. That now, if you were born maybe before 1964, what does that word mean? Under the bridge, right? Yeah, it's the scary monster that lives under the bridge and might eat you. Yeah, exactly. If you were born maybe after 1984, what does that word primarily mean? What's the usage? Now, I know older people know it, but what's the primary usage of that word? Yeah, people who do something typically online to elicit a negative reaction. They're trying to make you mad. Now, it's made its way from the internet into real life, so you could maybe say something like, oh, they're just trolling you if someone's trying to get a rise or a reaction out of you. They're just trolling you. But this is a word that's changed meaning, that's taken on new meaning. I got a series of questions I'm curious in asking. I don't know if I should ask for a boomer volunteer, a Gen Z volunteer, or just anybody. But let's see if you in the audience know this. What's this word mean? Some of you know. Some of you are like, I don't know. Does it mean haunting somebody? I don't know. No, it means you stop responding to someone's interactions primarily via text. You don't answer their calls. You don't respond to their Snapchats. You got ghosted. You turned into a ghost and disappeared from their life. You got ghosted. It's not a fun thing. Now, this one isn't a new term, but I think it certainly has taken on new meaning. In fact, I did not know what this term meant for a long time. I heard people use it, and I eventually had to look it up because I didn't know what it meant. But how many of you know what this term means? I got a fist bump out of Eva. You know what this means? Yeah? What does this mean? Throw out a definition. Making you mad. Make someone think that what they perceive as reality or what is reality isn't the case. Oh, I wasn't rude to you. You are just too sensitive. That's gaslighting. You're telling them, and it comes from an old term, but it's really taken on popular meaning and being used a lot. All right, last one. This word. What does this word mean? Timothy, I have to agree with you. For sure. Cringe. What does that mean? Now, if you're older generation, it means to like flinch at something like that. If you're younger generation, it means somebody who's Gen X using Gen Z terms. That's embarrassing and awkward, and nobody likes it, bro. So these are words our language is pretty fluid, pretty flexible, and these are words that changes. I'm gonna introduce a phrase, and some of you have definitely heard it, but it's a newish term, and it actually encapsulates this conversation that we're having about why are Christians so hurtful and hypocritical. It describes it. There's an actual term that has come into popular usage probably in the last 10, 15 years. There was a book written in 2012 with this title, but this is the word that we would use to describe why are Christians so hypocritical and hurtful, or why have people who grew up going to church left the church? Why has that happened? And they would use this phrase. They have experienced church hurt. They have experienced church hurt. It didn't used to have a category or label. It was just something that happened. And to be honest, I still think it's a little foggy and vague. I was in a doctor's office a while back, and they had that little sign on the wall, the pain scale. Have you seen that? They're trying to get you to describe your pain. And the reason they have a scale like that is because everything's subjective. Like for some people, a kid, they scrape their knee and they literally think life is over, They might have to amputate, and parents, you've gotten frustrated with how dramatic your children have been, and you've maybe threatened like, oh, do you need me to call an ambulance? A little sarcastic. It's because they're making a big deal out of what would be a small problem. They're acting like it's unimaginable and unspeakable, but it's really just discomforting. But everybody's got different pain tolerances and pain thresholds. There's people in this room who are experiencing chronic pain, and you wouldn't even know it. They're just living their lives, right? And there's some people who get this mild cold, and life comes to a halt for them. They just can't handle it. And so there's always the reason they use a pain scale is they're asking the question, is this like an ibuprofen situation, or is this a surgery situation? Sadly, as a minister, and I think this has probably increased over the last 10 or 15 years, talking with Christians about church hurt has become maybe a dominant feature of what it is to do pastoral work. We're going to get to that scale in just a minute because I want to show you what I think is a church hurt scale. I have talked with people, and maybe in this room, I have talked with people, and I have heard their stories about how they have been interacted with by other Christians and other churches, and I literally have had the thought, how are you still a Christian? How in the world are you still interested in loving God and finding a spiritual community? Because you have been so mistreated and so marginalized by people who should have done better. How in the world? I've talked to others, and I've thought, that is your big problem? That's your hang up? That sounds like an average Tuesday. Really? Because we moved communion from one part of the service to the other, you're going to quit? That's your church hurt? Come on, that's not that big of a deal. I've talked to people, oh, you grew up in a cult and still love Jesus? Amazing. How did you work through that? I've talked to people, just little minor things, little minor interactions between Christians, and they're done. Well, if this is what church is, I'm out of here. So I've thought about this topic a lot. I've thought about it a lot. There's no clear agreed upon definition of church hurt, and there's no church hurt pain scale. There's no DSM entry. There's no legal definition. So what are we talking about when we talk about church hurt? What are we talking about? I think it captures four broad experiences. I think the first one is what we would call relational hurt, that you've had some negative interaction with another Christian and it hurt your feelings. They were mean. They did something unkind. This is normal conflict, but it's in a spiritual community. And if it's in a spiritual community, it does feel heavier. It does feel heavier for sure, no doubt. And I think it's unique that we have a term for it. There's no, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I don't think that there's no such thing as office hurt, is there? That's not a category. There's no softball team hurt. Right? So the reason we've got a term for it is because there's something about the relational conflict that people experience within the church that does feel heavier. This is true. A friend of mine, this is years ago, shared a difficult private prayer request with someone that he thought he could trust, and it ended up being turned into church gossip. That really hurt him. That was church hurt, relational hurt. But that's stuff that a lot of people go through in a lot of different circumstances, but it's still painful. The next thing that you might call church hurt is leadership failure. That's when a leader messes up, when a leader gets it wrong, when a leader is too harsh, when they're misguided or they say something that's careless. Leaders' words do carry weight. There's that scary verse in the book of James that says, "Let not many of you become teachers, because you will receive a stricter judgment." It's a terrifying verse to think about, that the things that I say from a stage do carry weight, and I've got to be so thoughtful and cautious. And there's times where I have messed up, and things that I've said or done, or things that I haven't said or done, have really hurt people. So this is talking about people like me, the elders and teachers. I saw this happen, again, not here, when a youth minister walked away from a youth group and his marriage and his faith, and it just spiritually devastated the kids that had been in his youth group, because they thought, oh, was it not real? I mean, it really devastated their faith because he had this individual falling away. So there's leadership failure for sure. Then there's a toxic culture. This is a fun one. This is an unhealthy church environment. This is echo chamber, highly controlling, lack of grace, lack of transparency, no accountability, power grabs, pretense, backbiting. And often it's leadership, but sometimes ministers walk into churches that are toxic and they get chewed up and spit out. It's more than relational hurt. It's kind of the whole, it's just a mess. And it's really hard to see it until you're out of it. Some of you have been in churches that were toxic and you moved away unrelated to realizing that and looked back and realized, oh, that was a really unhealthy situation for me to be in. It's not fun at all. And then the final category I would offer is abuse, spiritual abuse. And this is when a person, a leader, or an institution messes up using spiritual authority. And this is dark. It's dark stuff. And unfortunately, it does happen. But this is when people use their spiritual authority, they use the Bible to manipulate people, to try to control them, and to do things that they don't really want to do. And therapy is good for a lot of reasons, but this is kind of the professional level therapy stuff. This is the stuff, unfortunately, they do make documentaries about. We call all of this church hurt, but do you see what a wide variety of things that it can encompass? So when someone says, oh, I was hurt by the church, well, wait, did you not get along with somebody else in your small group, or were you spiritually abused? Those are very, very different things, and they call for different reactions. There's a lot of overlap. It's important to point out there's a lot of overlap in all of this, but they're different, and they call for different responses. Do we need spiritual ibuprofen, or do we need spiritual surgery? What are we talking about? Is it abuse? Maybe we need to call 911. Maybe we need to call the FBI. Maybe we need to call HBO Max so they can make a documentary. Is it gossip? Well, that's painful, but it's not an arrestable offense just yet. You could try calling the police because somebody gossiped about you, but I don't think they're going to do much about it. Is it a toxic church? Maybe we do need to exit and do something different. Is it relational hurt? Maybe you need to have a tough conversation. So that you see the difference in responses. Here's where they are all the same, and this is why people use the same terminology, is that all church hurt does feel like a kind of betrayal. It does feel like a kind of betrayal. When I was a kid, I built myself a rope swing in my yard, side yard. There was a tree. I got up in the tree, tied the rope. On the bottom of the rope, I tied another branch, and it was wonderful. I had a wonderful time for about 30 seconds. I had the time of my life. It was beautiful. I was swinging, eyes closed, and then the branch snapped. I was a little kid. I didn't test it, nothing. Branch snapped, and I landed flat on my back, and it was the first time I had had the wind knocked out of me. You remember the first time you had the wind knocked out of you? You're like, oh, I can't take in a breath? This might be it. Tell my family I love them. I'm seeing black. You think you're dying, and then a couple minutes later, you're like back to normal, and everything's fine. Everything's fine. You thought you could trust that branch. You thought you could trust the rope, and it gave out on you. And I think that is why church hurt feels so tough, is because you thought you could trust someone or an institution, and it let you down, and it felt like betrayal. You expected welcome, and you got rejection. You expected grace, and you got judgment. You expected peace, and you got conflict. You expected care, and you got indifference. And that's why I think it's different than different kinds of church hurt. Now, this wasn't the way it was when Jesus founded the church, right? I mean, we humans have messed it up, right? So that you rewind 2,000 years, that's why we want to restore the early church, right? Because the early church used to be so good, and they were perfect, and they never messed up. Check out the biblical record. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 17. I'm only going to read you stuff that Paul the apostle wrote. These are letters that he wrote to churches. 1 Corinthians 11, 14. He says, in the following directives. Now, we're going to not read the directives, but he says, in the following things that I'm about to list, I have no praise for you. Woof. All right. You know this is going to be an interesting church gathering when that's how you started off. He goes, your meetings, and that's what he was talking about, your church services, when you gather together, it does more harm than good. Imagine that. Getting together at church and you walk away less of a Christian than when you walked in. That is wild. That is no good. That was one of the first churches that was founded in the world. This is in his next letter to the same church, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 20. He's like, I'm nervous. I'm afraid that when I come to you, I may not find you as I want you to be, and you may not find me as you want me to be. I fear that I may find discord and jealousy and fits of rage and slander and ambition, selfish ambition and slander and gossip and arrogance and disorder. That's a toxic church culture. Right in the first century, right off the bat, they were getting it wrong. How about Galatians chapter 2, verse 11? When Cephas, this is a popular passage, you probably have heard it. When Cephas, that's Peter, the apostle Peter, when he came to Antioch, which was a non-Jewish city, he was established in Jerusalem, which is a Jewish city. When he went to Antioch, which is a non-Jewish city, I opposed him to his face. Paul got in Peter's face, another apostle, because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision. That's Jewish people who are hardcore about circumcision. The other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy. And listen to this. So that by their hypocrisy, even Barnabas was led astray. Not Barnabas. Everybody loved Barnabas. Barnabas loved everybody. Are you kidding? This got to Barnabas? How awful. Peter is a hypocrite. Barnabas is a hypocrite. That's leadership failure. Or how about this? This is 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 16. This is toward the end of Paul's life. Look what he writes. He's been arrested. He's in prison. He's standing trial. This is like an arraignment. It's a Roman legal arraignment. He says, at my first offense, no one came to my support. No Christians were there. No one stood by me. No one showed up. No one sent me a card. No one sent me flowers. No one texted. No one called. No one showed up. Everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. Do you feel what Paul's saying there? Does that feel like church hurt? Man, I expected support and I got nothing. That's church hurt. That's relational pain. But I want to show you something else crazy that he said. What I'm about to read you is almost after everything else that he just wrote, okay? Almost, except for 2 Timothy. Ephesians 5, verses 25 through 27. Paul writes, Christ loved the church. This church that had caused so much pain and hurt and harm. Christ loved the church. He gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Not because it was perfect, but because Jesus had redeemed this horrible, awful, imperfect people and made them something for himself. So Paul somehow held these two ideas in mind. He's not being naive. He's not sweeping bad press under the rug. He's being transparent about the struggles and the problems in church. He's personally been hurt by the church. He holds this painfully realistic view of the church and an incredibly high view of the church. He is aware of its flaws, and he loves it anyway. And this is the thing that I think where we need to land. I don't love the church because I've never been harmed by Christians. I am aware of its flaws. I love the church because there's something beautiful and redeeming that God is doing through these people. And the people who have experienced church hurt and walk away, they seem to ignore that second part. Because we have to be fair. You have had painful moments at the hands of Christians, but you have also had beautiful moments at the hands of Christians. You have been brought low by Christians, but it is also Christians who have pulled you up and dusted you off. You have been let down by Christians, people you thought you could trust, but you have been lifted up by Christians, some of whom you barely knew. The most painful challenges I have experienced relationally have been with Christians. The most tangible experiences of God's grace and his generosity and his goodness have been from Christians. The good and the bad have been from Christians. It's like your family. You have never been more annoyed than you have with a family member. You have never been more frustrated than you have with a family member, and you love them deeply and profoundly and unequivocally. There's something beautiful like that with the church. Even when Christians fumble and we fail, there's something beautiful and good about this whole thing. And this is the truth. This is what I want people to hear, that the church, even when it's painful, is still worth it. Even when it's painful, it's still worth it. There's an author, speaker by the name of Jackie Hill Perry, and I'm almost always interested to hear what she has to say. She always has something thoughtful. She has a church hurt story that will make you want a big thing of popcorn, and you want to whoa, that's crazy. And it caused her to leave church for a period of time, very disillusioned with the leadership, with friendships in church. But this is what she says, and I love this. She said, "What got me over church hurt was the church." What got me over church hurt was the church. Is the church flawed? Yes. Is it perfect because of the blood of Jesus Christ? Yes. Those two things are true simultaneously. Several years ago, I did this thing called the Tough Mudder, and it's essentially a playground for grown-ups, and you get to pay a lot of money to do it. It's literally like a playground. It's monkey bars and rope nets and stuff. I'm not kidding, and you have to pay a lot of money for the privilege. You could just go to a playground, but no, this is somehow cooler. One of the obstacles that I did was this thing called electroshock therapy. This is not a picture of me. This is just off their website. And what they do is they hang these wires down, and they claim there's 10,000 volts of electricity running through those wires. And you got to run through them, and you're going to get blasted by electricity. I'm no electrician. We have some in the audience, but I think it's amperage that kills you more than volts, right? Is 10,000 volts pretty? That's like a daily thing for you, right? 10,000 volts right and left. No? I don't know, but 10,000 volts doesn't sound like a healthy thing. I don't know how this is legal. They're like, yep, we're going to shock you and you have to pay us money to do it. It just seems insane. But I did it. So you come to this obstacle, you see people run through it, and it looks like they got punched by an invisible fist. They'll be running through it, and they'll hit one of the electrical things, and they'll just whoa, like they're taking these invisible blows, and you're just like, oh, what am I doing? Like, is anybody looking? Can I just sneak around this thing? I don't want to die. Like, if somebody's a pacemaker, this just seems insane. I do not know how this is legal. Anyway, I'm here. I paid for it, so I gear up, and I'm just like, okay, I'm going to do this. Take deep breaths, and I run through this thing fully expecting to take some of these blows and to get knocked down, and they never came. The blows never came. I don't know how I did it, but I managed to sneak through just so, and I never once got electrocuted. And I'll tell you what, at the end of it, I felt like I had missed out a little bit. I was like, I paid to get electrocuted. I should have got electrocuted. I would like to lodge a complaint. Somehow I dodged it. Somehow I dodged the punches. Somehow I dodged the blows. That is not an option in life or in church. You will not be able to dodge the blows. They're going to happen. I mean, humans, we're kind of a mess. We're kind of a mess. Great relationships aren't great because people dodged the shock of some difficulty. Great marriages aren't great because it has been smooth sailing the entire time. Great friendships have required tough conversations that deepened those relationships. All those relationships and connections are great because they have been through some hard things. See, we will never have good, deep connections in church if we are not willing to address church hurt. If we have been harmed by somebody, or if we have done the harming, believe it or not, sometimes it's us that causes the problem. We will never develop deep friendships unless we address this. We will always be surface level. It will always be pretense. We will come to church. We will sit down. We'll sing a few songs, and then we'll be out of here. We won't have deep relationships unless we address church hurt. It is a reality. You will not get through life without taking some blows. It is going to happen. Great Christians and Christians in this room who have been Christian 40, 50, 60, Kevin, 60 years have been through some things. I'm not going to ask Kevin to give us his top 10 church hurts, but I bet you he could. 60 years in the church, there's been some things that have been hard. Good Christians have been through some hurt and still found a way to love one another and love God. So why are Christians hypocritical and hurtful? Well, here's your answer. It's because they're humans. They're humans. But then at the same time, why are Christians so loving and kind and gracious? Because we are being shaped by a good Father who is calling us to something better. We own our mistakes. We apologize. We confront if necessary. And then we bond and we come together and we become closer.